I see Warren has hopped on. Warren, I gave you co-host privileges. Feel free to get started whenever you feel ready.
Great. I'll give people another minute to pop on.
Perfect.
All right, I'll kick things off. Everyone can see the presentation okay? I see a thumbs up, great. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Warren Wells. I'm the Policy and Plan Director for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. I hope you're all coming to the right place, but my talk today is Tunnel Visions, the Death and Rebirth of Marin County's rail tunnels. Okay, so Marin County is probably best known as being on one side of America's most famous bridge, located across the Golden Gate Strait from San Francisco. It also happens to be a bike rider's paradise. It's the ancestral home of mountain biking, and where now legends of the sport like Joe Breeze, Tom Ritchie, Gary Fisher, and other guys souped up cruisers with balloon tires and sent them bombing down the slopes of wooded Mount Tamalpais in the 70s and 80s. The county is also a mecca for road riding. You know, despite being mere miles from one of the biggest job centers in the West Coast, through a combination of the county's topography, environmental preservation, and frankly, NIMBYism, the county has largely resisted development, with most of the land being made up of either parks or ranch land. And think of that what you will, but the combination of lots of hills and relatively few cars makes Marin, one of the great places for road riding. Okay, so I've talked about bikes a bunch, but this is TransitCon, and so I'm sure you're wondering when we'll get to the trains. So Marin, when bikes looked more like, less like this and more like this, Marin was very much a center of development and transportation expansion. It saw its first wave of development in the rail era. Goods such as hardwoods and dairy were shipped by rail to the ferry landing in Sausalito in southern Marin, where the Golden Gate Bridge is now, when they were taken across the San Francisco Bay by boat. So keep in mind that until the opening of the Golden Gate Bridge in 1937, the only way to get between Marin and the rest of the bay was by ferry, making passenger and freight rail to the ferry termini crucially important. And so, as I've mentioned, Marin is known for its topography, with the 2,600 Mount Tamalpais, you can see here in this photo from 1926, as a high point, and many smaller valleys and hills throughout the county. As such, while the trains were often able to follow creek beds or cut into the hillside, at times railway engineers of the 1870s had to tunnel through the ridges. So in the decade between 1874 and 1884, there were 8 rail tunnels built in Marin, with an additional one built in 1904. These tunnels saw heavy use for decades, with both passenger and freight service being the primary way people got around. Both began to wane with the advent of the automobile. In large part, passenger service in the lines ceased operation in the 1930s and 40s, around the Second World War, with freight service continuing in some instances to the 1970s. And so for decades, these tunnels lay dormant. Talk to some old timers in Marin, and they'll tell you stories about using the tunnels to take a shortcut before they could score a car, or a place to drink and tell ghost stories. I saw some from the Facebook group talking about using a blowtorch to open it up and sneak in there. Over time, the tunnels were boarded up to stop this behavior, and some of them, constructed as they were with redwood timbers, actually have partially collapsed. And so during these long years, when the transportation landscape of Marin changed dramatically, reorienting toward the supremacy of highways and the automobile. You can see here a similar photo we saw before, but with Route 1, going through, and 580 coming across the San Pablo Bay. The topography of Marin did not change. While transit and bikes have great advantages over cars, they do need, one thing they require is relatively flat ground to travel on. So with the greater realization that a shift toward higher efficiency transportation is necessary to preserve our climate, there's been a movement to reorient, to reopen some of these tunnels to both transit and bike pedestrian access. The California Park Hill Tunnel, this is a kind of a crappy old picture, I couldn't find a better one, which sits between San Rafael and Larkspur, became the first of these. So it was the only the only double-tracked tunnel in the county. It first reopened to bike pedestrian traffic in 2010, in large part due to advocacy from my organization and my predecessors here, and saw its first rail service in decades in 2019, when the Sonoma Marin Area Rapid Transit Commuter Rail, or SMART, was extended through to the ferry terminal just south of the tunnel in Larkspur. And today, the tunnel is an invaluable link in the active transportation network. I go through it all the time. And prior to its opening, the trip between San Rafael and Larkspur would have been 1.5 miles longer and required significant climbing. Today, the tunnel is unsurprisingly flat, mostly straight, and a very comfortable walk or ride for people of all ages and abilities. And today the tunnel sees, this is the Strava heat map, the tunnel sees hundreds of trips per day, despite admittedly imperfect connections, bikeway connections on both ends. And so while the Cal Park Hill Tunnel was reopened first, it may not be the one with the highest impact. So just 2 miles to the south, there's another piece of shuttered rail infrastructure, the Alto Tunnel. Running between the cities of Mill Valley and Corte Madera, there is a 30-story ridge. The only gap in that ridge line is filled with the US 101 highway. The tunnel, however, runs right through the ridge. So first, a little history for you nerds out here. So the tunnel was built in 1884 by the North Pacific Coast Railroad, later the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. I can never keep this stuff straight. It was a single track tunnel, narrow gauge railroad serving passenger and freight. Trains went all the way up to Cazadero. The last passenger train ran through the tunnel in 1940, and freight lingered on until 71. After that, Golden Gate Transit, the transit agency operated by the Golden Gate Bridge District, considered purchasing the tunnel for commuter rail use, but the deal fell through over neighborhood opposition. At some point, there was actually a partial collapse on the southern end, resulting in a house being demolished. In the years since the tunnel was closed, Rails to Trails projects have converted much of the adjoining pathway, or right-of-way on either ends of the tunnel, both in Mill Valley and Corte Madera, to flat, pleasant paths, separated from cars, massively popular with those in both cities. And while they do serve as excellent places to stroll and make short intercity trips, they don't serve longer distance trips well. Those intracity versus intercity trips well, because of the lack of connection at the ridge and where Alto is. To bike or walk between the two cities today requires choosing one of two bad options. You either have a challenging climb, largely used by roadies, Camino Alto, or high road in Spanish, which gives you an idea of what it's like, or an out-of-the-way route paralleling US 101 freeway called the Horse Hill Path, again with hill in the name. Neither route has sidewalks, and both are essentially out of the question for all but the most committed transportation riders, or those with no other option. Happily, changing this isn't just a tunnel dream, sorry. Some of the important work has already been done to bring this project to life. In 2010, there was a study conducted by the county that evaluated the costs and benefits of these three routes, the tunnel, the Alto Tunnel, Camino Alto, and the Horse Hill Path. It was projected the tunnel would see close to 2 million trips, bike and pedestrian trips a year, resulting in 2,000 fewer auto trips every day. And these benefits wouldn't just be realized in greenhouse gas emissions and traffic efficiency, but also less particulate emission, wear and tear on the streets, ambient noise, and importantly, it would be much safer than riding on the road. In the last 10 years, the two alternate routes have seen 23 bike riders hit and one pedestrian hit, and 23 bike riders hit and injured, as well as one pedestrian. One of the bike riders actually is a family friend of ours who has a traumatic brain injury from a crash on this route. And these figures are just reported crashes, which we know is always an undercount because of some crashes go unreported, especially solo crashes. So the benefits aren't just quantitative, right? Or aren't just quantitative. Here are a couple quotes from a video produced by a group advocating for the reopening of the tunnel. This is Lucy. If the Alto Tunnel was open, I could bike to my acting class, which is in Mill Valley. Kids my age, we really want to get on our bike. We want to get places on our bike and be able to go places on our own. This is Miles, a general contractor. As a person living with ALS, I face daily challenges. I live in Larkspur and commute to Mill Valley where my shop is. If we had the option of riding through the Alto Tunnel, it would be a complete game changer. In this video, you see him riding, he has an electric recumbent bike. Now, obviously, this wouldn't be free. A 2018 engineering study found that the total cost would be approximately $50 million to complete the bike pedestrian path through the tunnel, or so these are, I'm escalating these by a few years because this is a few years back, or $10 million, roughly $10 million to close the tunnel permanently and prevent any future subsidence and threats to the homes above. And so, while this is obviously a large amount of money in the active transportation world, it's actually quite a small amount of money in the transportation world. Just 15 miles away, the Transportation Authority of Marin has helped direct over $750 million to add 16 miles of lanes, just one lane each direction to US 101 between Marin and Sonoma, a price that would buy, if you do the math, 15 Alto tunnels. And so what looks like a lack of resources is actually just a lack of political will. It happens that a particularly wealthy person involved in Marin politics lives near the South Portal and has made it clear that he would prefer that nothing change, citing cost, noise, litter, trespassing, homelessness, crimes, and et cetera. The biggest study of its kind on this question, done by the Rails Trails Conservancy, found that trail projects such as this actually result in less rather than more crime, because when unused areas become busier, there are more eyes on the street. Happily, I have a job where I get to try to fix this stuff by convincing the electeds of the county and the neighboring cities that they'll all be better off if the tunnel reopens, and that there are more people who want a better future than want our current bad present. Okay, just real quick, because this is TransitCon, I do want to head one question off of the pass. So, if this is an old rail right of way, why not run trains to it instead? Why have this be a bike pedestrian tunnel? So that's a great question. SMART currently terminates 2 miles north, but couldn't you run it all the way to Sausalito? So ultimately, my response to that is ultimately, like, on the rail right of way on either side of the tunnel has been a trail for decades. It's 2 miles on the north end and 3 miles on the south end. And while it's not because it's not particularly wide, you really have a hard time putting the train back and still maintaining a pathway which is, by use rates, the county's most popular park, and a very important transportation route. So that it would be a real political challenge. And then there's actually the real question of what rail investment we should make in Marin, given its stated commitment to low density. Pre-pandemic, the commuter rail line I mentioned earlier, SMART, saw fewer than 4,000 daily trips, which is less than many like East Bay bus lines. And that figure has fallen significantly in the pandemic. Also say, I'm a huge booster for transit, but I think you can make the case that there's significant more active transportation demand on this corridor than there is fixed rail, especially when you'd still need to make a transfer to a ferry to get to San Francisco, because the trains wouldn't run over the bridge. Okay, so now that I covered my bases there. So, okay, next steps, how do we get this sucker open? So the next steps would be for the County of Marin, Okay, there's some initialisms here. I'm sorry if this is annoying, but there's some, that they would be for the County Marin to add the project to its capital improvement plan, or CIP, and then fund EIR, an environmental impact report, which for all you non-Californians out there is a document required under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, that compiles the environmental impacts of the projects. At that point, you need to obtain a mitigated negative declaration, and then start looking for money for funding for design and construction. And because for projects like this, the funding wouldn't come from the cities. This is something you hear people. That's like Mill Valley doesn't have that kind of money. No, yeah. I'll keep this PG, but it's obviously not. This is the kind of money that would come from the federal or state level, and that's how the Cal Park Hill tunnel opened back in 2010. Okay, so just a quick wrap up. Why should you care about all this? Now, there are a lot of reasons why we should be fostering active transportation. We should be building active transportation. Obviously, I think we all here agree. Greenhouse gas emissions are increasing. We need to slow them and actually decrease them. And projects such as this, the Alto Tunnel is not going to solve anything, but projects such as this are the kind of ones we should be building out across the country. Second, even if climate change were an issue, air quality is a massive cost. People in all around the Bay Area, especially certain neighborhoods in Marin, suffer from elevated risk of asthma because of particulate emissions put out by cars. So getting more cars off the roads is going to clean our air. We saw this in the first couple of weeks after the start of the pandemic in March of 2020. Next is access. This is Nick, a gentleman I met on the, you can see the train just passed behind him. This is just about a mile north of the Cal Park Hill Tunnel. He's a senior who lives in Marin. He says he has a car, but doesn't feel super comfortable driving it, and uses his electric tricycle to get around, and uses the pathway and the tunnel. He had just come from there to get to shopping in Mill Valley from his home in Larkspur, because it's easier and he gets some exercise. So the more, and like the people we saw earlier, giving people a way to get around that doesn't require a $5,000, $10,000, $40,000 tool, and something closer to $2,000 like this, or much cheaper, is really important. And lastly, is safety. I almost hate to put this in. I struggle with this as a bike advocate. I'm always trying to get people on bikes, but also, I have to recognize that biking is not safe today, and I recognize that there are a lot of people who want to bike but don't feel safe doing it. Bike and pedestrian fatalities are skyrocketing on America's roads. They rose in 2020. They rose again in 2021, the biggest year-over-year increases we've seen in 40 years. And just yesterday, I learned that someone was killed while riding a bike in Marin, not where Alto Tunnel is, but where another tunnel that we're still working to reopen is, White's Hill. So on that dour note, how can you get involved? So I don't know where, actually I haven't seen how many people in the room here. I don't know where everyone lives, so I'm gonna give sort of a tiered set of answers. If you live in Marin, or ride in Marin, or are curious about riding in Marin, awesome. You should become a member of MCBC, and that'll support the work that I do and the work of an organizer we're trying to hire this summer to work specifically on this project. And even if you don't have cash to become a member, you should definitely get in touch, because depending where you live, I have some people that you should email. Okay, so 2, you don't want to become a member, but you live in California and you want more stuff like this to happen. I'd recommend that you subscribe to our newsletter, so you read my great writing, and I'll keep you in the loop about what we're doing here. And you can become a member of California Bicycle Coalition, CalBike, and support the work that they're doing. They're working hard to get more funding for projects such as this, and for changing policy so that California stops expanding freeway networks and actually starts building out a robust transit and active transportation network. Lastly, you're not in California, but you believe in this stuff. Why else would you be here? So join the League of American Bicyclists and your local bike org. Even if you're not a bike rider yet, more people on bikes helps you out. So many of the street changes that make things safer for people riding bikes also make it safer to walk. And the more people who ride bikes, the fewer people drive, which means cleaner air and fewer cars, your bus gets stuck behind. Okay, so lastly, if you're ever riding in Marin and want advice, shoot me an email or Twitter DM, or if you're riding Marin and have bad experience, I want to know about it. That's my job. So thanks a ton for coming to this talk. I'd love taking these questions.